Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 15.3 mid-lane tier list. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a decent amount of changes in the mid lane this patch, mostly coming from the domination tree. The buffs towards Electrocute, Halo Blades, and Dark Harvest have definitely shifted some things around. We also saw some direct nerfs towards the likes of Cassiopeia, Galio, Jace received an adjustment, primarily a nerf trying to get him off tank builds. And then we saw a buff to Swain. Let's get into it. So the D tier is going to consist of the same three champions. We have Tristana, Azir, and Smolder. All three of these champions heavily underperform within the mid lane. In Tristana and Smolder's case, they've obviously been quite aggressively nerfed to try and get them out of the role for competitive. They were a bit very unhealthy when they were in that situation where they could just push waves and always kind of inevitably scale up and have priority in mid lane. They've obviously tagged that quite a bit and pushed them more towards gold scaling champions and less of like level scaling, because that is one of the biggest levers to shift a champion from mid lane to bot lane. On top of this, the other champion here is Azir. Azir obviously is a very, very heavily pro-jailed champion. If he ever really performs in solo queue, he tends to be one of the mainstays in competitive. Right now, I believe he's beginning to pick up in competitive again, as a champion which has a lot of control when you give him the resources he needs to really thrive within the game, combined with the amount of damage he can output. It can make him a very valuable champion there. Problem in solo queue is the games are very chaotic. He really gets punished quite aggressively in most situations. His early lane is very weak. He does struggle into most matchups. You'll oftentimes find yourself falling quite far behind, especially if you're playing into some of the buffed assassin matchups, which are definitely going to poach you if you are ever mispositioning or on a bad timer. Just a champ I wouldn't really recommend playing in his current state. He is also one of the hardest mid laners you can play in the game. Moving on to the C tier then, Twisted Fate, still in a very awkward spot. Definitely could do with a buff to really elevate him and push him back into the mid lane meta. The champion obviously suffered a while back when they nerfed AD. They also tagged AP quite a bit, and he's never really picked up since then. You can make him work, but he is not going to output the damage, and he is kind of really built around his gold card. I mean, obviously he's always really been built around his gold card and that CC, but he doesn't really have the damage to follow up at the moment. But electric buffs are nice, especially if you are playing it on him, but Arcane Comet, stuff like that, can still be something you opt into. Zed remains in the C tier, still a very hard to pilot champion, not a pick I traditionally recommend in the lower ranks. If you're very comfortable in the pick, you'll make him work. If you're not, just a pick to avoid. Obviously, you have the accessibility of Electrocute now. Conqueror is still something you can opt into, kind of akin to like your Kianas and Talons. These three champions really do like Conqueror quite a bit, and were opting into it over Electrocute, I believe, most of last patch. But yeah, Electrocute definitely helps him, especially in those short burst trades where you're getting maybe like an EQ auto off, and then, yeah, disengaging. Overall, Zed still underperforming at the moment, but does remain within my C tier. The other two champions which remain here are Ziggs and Jace. Jace obviously got nerfed this patch. It ended up being slightly negative. Something to mention though is he was kind of buffed in a hidden way this patch. Going into next patch, he's actually just getting a straight buff. They are the way his W works is traditionally would always cap out the attack speed, so you'd always get your 3 W autos in the 2.5 second window. With the 3 second attack speed cap buff, it was capping at, I believe, like 2.63 or something, so he wasn't actually hitting the attack speed cap. They've gone back, they're going to rectify it in next patch, and now he will hit the 3 second cap, so that will be some level of power. But obviously within the current state of the game, he is still gaining some power through that, which wasn't like reflected within the patch notes. Obviously the main things to mention are the fact that his Q base damage is quite heavily down, gain some through the AD ratio. It's about 18 minutes when you break even, and then past that you are usually stronger within the game. Tank builds, definitely a lot weaker. You're not really going to be playing them anymore. Bruiser builds still look viable, especially if you're very comfortable on them. Lethality builds like your Eclipse and your Yomu's variants are definitely the builds I would recommend. He really values like the Manamune AD as well, so getting like a Yomu's Manamune pairing going can allow you to have a lot of agency. Hubris is a very nice item on him if you can somehow slot it into your build. It is quite hard to, so don't play around the idea that you're going to get Hubris every game. Play around Yomu's Manamune, and he should be oftentimes stronger later on. relatively even to power down to neutral like through the early into like the mid game. Overall, still going to remain as a C tier pick. I still think he's a hard champion, something I wouldn't traditionally recommend as an AD option within the mid lane when you have access to things like Garen, for example, which I traditionally recommend over him. Picks dropping down are Corki, who has obviously the way you've got to look at it is Electrocute and like a lot of the assassins are going to have to poach win rate from somewhere. There are champions which are just going to inherently struggle a bit more, and just naturally the win rate of most mages will drop if they are not opting into Electrocute. Corki was already on the tail end of the B tier. Other champions being buffed around him has dropped him down to the C tier. He is still a very good bot laner and a great flex option, especially within competitive. For average play though, he just doesn't perform as well at the moment, so I am going to drop him down to the C tier. The other champion being dropped down is Brand. Brand has just been underperforming for a while. Even though Dark Harvest got buffed this patch, he still is not in a great spot. A champion like this should always be really performant in mid and low MMR, because he basically goes towards non-viable the higher up you go outside of like the jungle. Right now though, he's relatively underperformant in mid elo. He's still performant to an extent in low elo, so like gold below, still can play the champion, still find results, kind of akin to like your A-Souls and things. But yeah, not a pick I'm going to recommend in his current state. Lots of champions moving up, so we have Fizz, Katarina, and LeBlanc. All three of these champions run Electrocute. LeBlanc definitely the biggest winner here, being able to like as consistently trade with her range with like with auto Q auto or auto W Q. There's loads of different or auto QW, loads of different trading patterns you can go to enable Electrocute to be procced on a target. It's just strictly power up on her. It has definitely helped her quite a bit. She has really refound her footing. Obviously this champion traditionally struggles a lot more within average MMR brackets, but looking like a viable option now. In high elo, I believe this pick is probably one of the better mid laners you have access to, and with other champions being nerfed next patch, could definitely see this pick on the rise. Katarina and Fizz strictly gain power with the Electrocute changes. Fizz is an incredibly obnoxious champion, which a lot of mages have a hard time dealing with, so if you're seeing like your Hueys and your Syndras, Fizz can be a great answer into those. Katarina, if you can get a snowball going and you're very comfortable with champion, definitely doing a bit better. All three of these picks though, you need to put time into them. If you don't have the practice on them, you will struggle. I would recommend more traditional mages over them if you just haven't put the practice in. Other picks remaining within the B tier, Yasuo and Yone still sit towards the lower end of the B tier. Both these champions are, well, I mean, Yasuo's case, he's being buffed next patch, but will also benefit from the IE changes. Same goes for Yone if they opt into it as like a third option, whether that's like a Bork, Chill Bow, IE 3-item core. Be interesting to see. But yeah, Yasuo definitely going to be very strong next patch. Yone still going to be underperformant for like average MMRs, I believe. Both these champions obviously are pretty hard to pilot. You're not going to instantly pick them up and be like very successful, but if you have the time in them, they can still be very solid AD picks to have within your arsenal. Yone tends to be a bit more translatable into higher elo. Yasuo tends to be a bit more one trick dependent. Like people will just sink a lot of time into this champion and very much make him work. But yeah, both these picks sit within the beta at the moment, will definitely benefit going into next patch though. Zoe benefits from the Electrocute changes, definitely sits towards the high end of the B tier, still a relatively hard to pilot champion, very predicated on early game advantages. Echo being buffed in 15.4, benefits from Halo Blades and Electrocute being buffed this patch. Halo Blades obviously allows his very obnoxious like E level 1 trading to be very potent. Electrocute obviously can really help just basic trading, like with your E and Q combined, can output a huge amount of damage if you're blocking your passive. Diana still remains the beta option, it's being adjusted going into the next patch, being nerfed for jungle, buffed for solo lane. Definitely will benefit, especially within the mid lane. Gaining base damage on the Q is huge. I could definitely see Diana really shooting up towards the high end of the A tier going into next patch. Kassadin benefits from Electrocute changes if you opt into it. He does have other keystone options though. He is not bound to it by any means. He is fine, you can make him work. I don't think he's in the greatest of spots. I think he does sit towards the low end of the B tier, and I've never been a huge fan of like scaling options which don't really have that strong early game agency in like as mid to like high options. But if you're mid to low, Cassinan still a solid option, kind of akin to like your ASOS and stuff. Like these are great low elo options. Cassinan's a bit harder to pilot, obviously, but if you can get to the late game, they are very, very powerful champions. Kiana, Talon, both benefit from the electrocute changes. I believe both of them still can go Conqueror if they so desire. Kiana's in a good spot for where she has been over like the last couple of years. Talon is fine. Like you can, I think Talon's easier to play than Kiana, but both these picks definitely very, very potent if you've put the time into them. Can obviously find very, very big lethal angles within mid lane if you are executing your combos correctly. Talon obviously has one of the strongest level 2s if you're able to rotate your bleed and you're dropping ignite on them. That's a very, very like high amount of damage you can do in that situation. Asol remains as a B tier option. I'm going to have him towards the lower end of the B tier. I think this champion's great for low elo. I think he's really bad in high elo though, especially at the moment. They've definitely stripped a lot of what made him viable in high elo with like the tap Qs and stuff. They've taken that away from him. I do think they might have to do some more changes down the line to kind of like push him to more being a bit more just viable across the board. But right now, still a very good low elo pick. Underperforms in high elo, sits within my B tier at the moment. Akshan sits towards the high end of the B tier. I think the champion's good if you put the time into it. I still think he struggles if you like. A lot of people who play Akshan play a lot of Akshan, and it shows oftentimes. Like they will often be very, very slippery within fights, output a huge amount of damage onto a single target, making sure they're getting E resets and then just being mobile around the fight. I think he's a solid B tier option. If you put the time into him, though, he is in a pretty good spot. And Bessa sits towards the low end of the B tier. I honestly consider dropping her all the way down to the C tier. She's not performing that well in the mid lane anymore. She was doing fine early on, like on her release, and then like a couple of the following patches. She performs fine into the melee options traditionally, but a lot of the range will just harass her, push her out of lane. If she's opting into electrocute, she's giving up some of that sustained combat pattern, and if she's not running Resolve tree, then she does just lose a lot of durability. Overall, sits towards the low end of the B tier at the moment. Probably close to the C tier, just not performing that well. Also a pretty hard to pilot champion, and it's a relatively new release, so we'll have some of that, like obviously dragging her down. Silas sits within the B tier at the moment. I think this champ's pretty close to being bumped back up to the A tier. He's good and he's still very strong in like the spots where you want to play him, and electrocute change was very nice for him. I think it has swung him back from Conqueror to electrocute. Obviously playing electrocute means you're traditionally leaning into some of those more burst orientated builds. Conqueror, traditionally you're going to be opting into like your protobouts and some more of your health items where you're like a rift maker down the line, cosmic drive for example. But yeah, like the electrocute, storm surge, stuff like that looks to be doing a bit better at the moment, but you can definitely swap between the two. He definitely sits towards the higher end of the B tier. Rise is sat within the B tier at the moment. I think he's a very solid option into shorter range compositions. I think he is a bit conditional though at the moment. Don't think he's a champion you can pick in every spot, but I think he gets the job done. And I think if you're very comfortable in Rise, you should still, but I mean, you'll probably play him still. So yeah, sits towards the mid to high end of the B tier. Probably have him a bit more like here. Akali benefited from the electrocute buff. Still sits towards the high end of the B tier. I don't think she quite bumps up into the A tier. I might change my mind going into next patch. I do like Akali. I think she is a very solid option. She's not as hard to pilot as some of the other assassins. So definitely a champion if you like assassins. I would recommend over some of the other options. Great AP assassin option. Yeah. Good to go. Sits towards the high end of the B tier. Aurora. I thought this champion would do a bit better going into this next patch, but Comet, Electrocute, both seem to still be very viable options. Obviously, the Electrocute buffs this patch does help her. It makes her like early game trading very obnoxious, and I know that Aurora is obviously a very frustrating champion for some picks to play into. Is she quite A tier at the moment for like average play? Probably not. I think the higher up you go though, she is more oppressive. She is a relatively hard to pilot mid lane mage. Yeah, I'd say elite A to S tier, lower elo, more like B to C. This pick still does just underperform in those lower ranks in her current state. Vladimir doing a bit better, also sits towards the high end of the B tier, not quite being bumped up to the A tier at the moment, but a lot of the B tier is in a pretty good spot, just not quite contesting with what I would consider some of the A tier options. Dropping down is Malphite and Gragas. Both these champions just not performing as well at the moment. I don't like Malphite in his current state. I think Malphite's actually pretty bad. I think he traditionally can only come in as like a late game counter pick, and he just doesn't have as much agency as some of the other options. And that feels quite bad when you are saving like this kind of pick to like, yeah, your R5 position. You'd rather have a pick which is going to oftentimes stomp lane a lot harder and not just be more like a neutralizer or just a tank traditionally. Overall, sits as a B2 option. I still obviously understand he's very easy to play, and if you are looking for an easy to play tank which can flex between both mid and top, then Malphite is one of the better options for that, but definitely not quite the winning like R5 pick which he used to be back when he was a bit stronger. I also think like Fulmer is a bit weaker at the moment, and that does definitely hurt him in his current state. Karma, I'm going to drop down to the B tier. I think I slightly overrated her. I still think she's very good. I really like Karma mid-top support, especially if you're opting into like the Axiom Arcanist. You can run like Malignance both solo lanes in support. I do like the Moonstone Echoes of Helia build, but yeah, I'm going to drop her down to the B tier. I just don't think she's quite as consistent or has as high agency to be one of the A tier picks at the moment. What else we got to put down? Actually, that is it. Moving up then is Annie, who benefited from the electrocute changes. I think she's been slightly on the rise as of recent. Obviously can be very oppressive in lane if you are like if you're able to like utilize your E effectively against specific picks and like spells. Obviously you can opt into like a grass bone plating setup, but more traditionally the electrocute setup is the way you want to go. Access to a lot of burst damage, and if you're rotating like QW Tibbers with like auto weaving with her very oppressive long range, she can be quite the lane bully and have quite the burst potential. Bump her up to the A tier. Moving up as well is Swain, who does sit towards the high end of the A tier. I think Annie's more like a mid to low A tier option. I think Swain is a high A tier option, very close to the S tier. The buffs this patch were very nice for him. Getting access to 3 more health every time you get a passive proc does mean a lot. It's if you're getting like 20-30 passive procs in a game, you are looking at a lot of health being printed there. If anything, it's like getting access to like overgrowth basically as like another rune. On top of that, he also gained 10% AP ratio on E, which is nice. It allows him to do a bit more damage within fights. That isn't the main buff here, but definitely does enable him to be a bit stronger. You can run Axiom Arcanist on him. It looks to be a pretty solid rune for him. And yeah, I'd say he sits as a high A tier option. Bit easier to play. Tends to want to play into short range compositions though. If you play him into a lot of range, you'll definitely struggle as he just doesn't have the tools to really deal with that in a lot of situations. Quinn is being added to the A tier. Quinn has obviously been doing a lot better this patch. The buffs directly to her, the 20% attack speed on W on her first max, combined with the electrocute buffs, were very big. She now trades a lot more aggressively. She has a lot more DPS. On top of that, Symbiotic Souls is being buffed in 15.4. Quinn is a champion I'd recommend learning at the moment, especially if you are looking for an AD option within the mid lane and the top lane. Mid lane Quinn, I do think outperforms top lane Quinn and has done for a while. I know a lot of Quinn mains actually just take Quinn into the mid lane because she is very strong here. Mel sits as an A tier option, not a locked A tier option. She's not actually performing absurdly well at the moment. She is, I wouldn't say hard to play either. The champion does depend a lot on matchup and like team composition. Like the W can be a very oppressive ability into specific team comps. It can also feel kind of lackluster if you're not playing against a team which really you get a lot of value out of it from. She's immobile. I don't think she even scales incredibly well. Like she is pretty oppressive if you are getting access to a lot of items. I think that is the main factor for Mel. But yeah, not the strongest scaler. Can scale though. Can obviously output decent DPS. Do think she's a bit more situational, but yeah, I'd still have her as like a low A tier pick. Close to the B tier though. I don't think she is like the Thanos of the mid lane. Does get stronger though the higher up you go, as like, people have like learned her like more effectively there. So sits towards the low end of the A tier for mid MMR. Heimerdinger, it's an A tier pick. I still think this champion's pretty niche in the mid lane. Most people traditionally just don't understand how to play against him, and I think he's a very solid A tier pick. Neferi bumps up to the B tier. I missed her. This champion is still very low elo skewed. She's kind of like the Briar of the mid lane. Very simple to play assassin. Like, she is probably the simplest assassin to play in the game. Like, you just pick her up, and like within a couple of games you'll have her pretty much mastered. This champion doesn't have a huge amount of depth to it, and it oftentimes just acts as more like a stats checky like W onto a target and hope you can just get resets and go from there. Champion better in lower elos, not so performant higher up, sits as more like a mid-B tier option at the moment. Lissandra keeps a spot within the A tier. Electrocute being buffed was nice for her. She performs quite well into assassins and melee matchups, where you can really utilize the power of your ultimate and shorter range abilities traditionally. Orianna, Xerath sit as low A tier options. They're not like the most performant picks, but if you have the practice on them, they can definitely net you results. Orianna, obviously a bit more of a elite/competitive mainstay. Xerath tends to be a bit more reliant on like specific team compositions, where you can freely utilize your range and like harass to like just push people out of lane, and then utilize it later on into the game to just force like objectives when you are able to harass them and push them out of like specific spots. Vel'Koz, similar vein as Xerath, both of them sit like pretty close to each other, both very solid artillery mages if you are picking them in the right spots. Neeko sits within the A tier, still very unpopular, obviously more popular within the support role at the moment, but can still be a very solid mid laner. The electric buffs once again helped Neeko. She kind of opts into like Arcane Comet Summonary in specific matchups, but can now opt into Electrocute if she is able to consistently rotate it onto a single target. Kayle sits, actually, I've got the top laners here, so the Kayle, the Garen, the Pantheon, the Cho'Gath, all these picks, very performant in their own individual ways. In fact, I'm going to drop Aurelia down from the S tier as well, and have her with the other top laners. Aurelia just not performing as well in like mid to low MMR, but she's still very solid the higher up you go. The nerfs which she has received over like the last couple of patches have mostly been tagging down her excess late game damage. In Kayle's case, she is a great option at the moment, really benefiting from a lot of the things which have like gone into this new season, combined with buffs towards the tail end of the last split. She has definitely found her footing. The patch was really valuable for her, being having access to level 16 earlier and just like level spike specifically, combined with more adaptive force, is very, very powerful. If you can get access to your items like your Nasha, your Rabadon, your Shadow Flame, she is a very powerful champion. Garen really benefited from Axiom Arcanist. That is the main thing going for him at the moment. He is generally more performant in the mid lane though. Cho'Gath, this is the Halo Blades Chevalier build. You don't need to go at every game. Like, that is something which I've seen a lot of people like fall for. Like, they've been just like a man like going it in every single spot, when you can just play Grasp, Heartsteel Cho'Gath and be a really unkillable tank, which is a lot of sustain during laning phase. That being said though, Chevalier Halo Blades Dead Man's build is very powerful. It gives you access to a huge amount of movement speed. Symbiotic Souls being buffed next patch is nice if you go that route. I still prefer the Swifties path, as that boot feels very nice, having that consistent movement speed and slow resist. And Pantheon just performing a bit better at the moment. He's not the highest out of these like 5 by any means. He is more reliant on like early game advantages, but he is very good if you pick him into matchups which just can't really do anything against his point and click CC, and very oppressive early game damage. Like, he really dominates like the Yasuo Yone matchups, for example, and a lot of assassins really struggle into Pantheon. Lux sits within my A tier. She is a very solid option. Great wave clear, great burst damage, needs to be ahead of the curve. If you fall behind, you'll definitely struggle. She is very popular, and she's a very solid option. So I definitely think she sits as a high A tier here. Talia, Veigar, Vex, actually, I'm going to bump up, and Anivia are my remaining A tier options. In Vex's case, Electric buff really helped her, combined with the fact that she's very solid into most assassins, and Yasuo and Yone are still very popular mid laners, and she performs very well into those two. She, gets a bump up into the A tier. Talia, still a very performant A tier option. Had her here from last patch. The Electrocute buff is nice if you opt into that. Things like First Strike, Phase Rush are still very nice keystones on her. Veigar, great low elo option. decent mid-MMR option, tends to fall off the higher up you go though, kind of like Malzahar, except for I think Malzahar is even more trivialized in his current state. Yeah, sits as a high A2 option. And then Anivia benefited from the electrocute changes as well, definitely performing decently in her current state, has access to a lot of damage, her wave clear very oppressive, and her early game is deceptively strong, which I think a lot of people kind of misinterpret on the champion, and the control aspect of the pick with the additional objective within the game is very nice. She is a very solid A tier option. Galio leads us off in the S tier. I think this champion is still very solid, very good into a lot of the AP picks. Not as blindable anymore. Like, I think Galio blind is definitely going to struggle a lot more into some of the AD options. That being said, though, 38 health lost. I think he went from 638 health to 600. Does mean something. It means he is just less durable early on into the game. He has lost some power from that. The champions who have gained like plus 20 damage on electrocute, if they opt into it as well, are like shifting the balance by like 50, 70 HP if they are rotating another electrocute proc, and that means a decent amount. So Galio sits towards the lower end of the S tier. I still think he is relatively easy to play though, and definitely a pick I would recommend everyone has within their arsenal into like a lot of the mage options. Cassiopeia drops from the S plus tier to the S tier, not doing as well anymore. The pick obviously, I mean, she's still doing very well. I phrased that wrong. Cassiopeia is still a very good pick in the current game. She's not the Thanos pick anymore though. The champion did lose once again more power. The 5% AP ratio loss on Q and the 5% AP ratio loss on W means something. She's still very good, still great into short range compositions where she can really abuse the amount of DPS she can output. If she gets access to a lot of items, she is still a very, very strong option. Definitely still deserves a spot within the S tier. Hui, still a great S tier option, is being nerfed next patch though. It's unfortunate because I think Hui is a very cool champion to have within the mid lane. The champion has access to a lot of tools within his arsenal. I don't believe he's as frustrating to play against as some of the other options as well. Like, he takes a decent amount of skill to play, and yeah, it's unfortunate, but he has definitely been overperforming as of recent, having access to a lot of chip damage, and his wave clear, his infinite ability to stall out games can feel very oppressive for a lot of champions to play against. Victor sits towards the low end of the S tier, also a champion which is kind of getting close to dropping down to the A tier. Direct nerfs, I believe, two lots of direct nerfs have definitely hurt him. The excess damage on R, the excess damage on Q definitely means something that later on you go into the game. He spikes a lot, in the mid game quite a bit. The late game is definitely not as oppressive as it has been in previous iterations, but I still think he's a very solid option. And if you, obviously enjoy Arcane, then he is still a pick which I would recommend if you have watched the show. Malzahar is my S tier pick, which probably shouldn't be an S tier pick. I think this champ is incredibly simple to play and really trivializes a lot of what a lot of people struggle within the mid lane, and that is why I really promote the option of playing Malzahar. Going into high elo, I would recommend moving on to other champions, but if you are anywhere from the rank of like Emerald to Iron, Malzahar is a great option for you. Really do recommend playing this champion. He trivializes wave clear. His trading pattern is very simplistic. He scales up very nicely, and it's all about CSing, making sure you're like how you manage and just push out the wave. Just how you push the wave and how you use that spare time is like the main core aspect of this champion. Syndra, still a great S tier option. The bug fix on W has been fixed now, where it didn't cost mana. That combined with the ult damage nerf in I believe 2 patches ago did hurt her. It has meant that she sits as more like a mid S tier option. You could honestly move any of these picks around, and they're all relatively similar in terms of like what value they can provide in specific compositions. But yeah, Syndra, probably my recommended go-to just mage generalistically. I think Syndra is very, very powerful with the long range CC, the amount of burst potential she can have, the very, very skill expressive laning phase, if you like master it, can also add to this champion. And yeah, I think she can very much be rewarded if you play her well. And Ari, the buffs towards electrocute this patch really benefited her. She was still one of the champions which was opting into it a lot, even though it was, I believe, slightly outperformed by like your Ares and your primarily your Ares. But yeah, the buffs dispatched to it really did help her. A lot of people were going electrocute and have stuck with electrocute, and she now finds herself as an S tier option. really do recommend learning this champion. I think like your Aries, your Hueys, your Sindras are a bit more like your mainstream picks, even like your Victors and your Gallios to an extent. But like Malzahar, Cassiopeia, very solid options. Cassiopeia great into short range compositions, and Malzahar great as like a stepping stone into bigger things, I would say. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.